22 formal complaints within 18 years. 19 of these pertained to the detention of black professionals in prosperous locales, a pattern so evident it should have concluded his tenure a decade prior. An architect exiting his office structure in Buckhead detained for 40 minutes. A pediatrician conducting grocery errands in Virginia Highland subjected to a search in the parking area. A university lecturer walking his canine companion in Morningside questioned regarding residential larceny. Each complaint concluded similarly: mandatory professional development that Cross attended but never implemented. One Saturday afternoon in Atlanta, his 2 decades of perceiving criminality alongside successful black individuals collided with someone whose daily professional undertaking involved prosecuting wrongdoers, and that confrontation would ultimately bring Cross's career to a close, cost the municipality $4,200,000, and expose a department that had condoned his modus operandi for nearly 2 decades. A black gentleman in his mid-50s, James Mitchell, was standing in a Whole Foods parking facility, placing reusable grocery sacks into the storage compartment of his BMW. His mobile communication device was secured within his attire, entirely engrossed in the ordinary activity of arranging his weekly provisions. No transgression, no infraction, no suspicious conduct, merely a man stowing groceries into his vehicle on a Saturday afternoon. But Officer Cross observed him through a perspective distorted by 18 years of unchecked prejudice. He could not reconcile that a black individual possessing an expensive automobile might have acquired it lawfully, nor could he envision that the person he was about to approach had spent 15 years prosecuting the very kind of unlawful detentions Cross specialized in initiating. Before we proceed, from what location are you observing? If this is your inaugural visit, kindly click the subscribe icon. Narratives such as these necessitate dissemination, and your backing aids us in illuminating further truths. Atlanta, Georgia, the Virginia Highland District, an affluent vicinity recognized for its tree-lined thoroughfares, historical residences, fashionable eateries, and the sort of retail establishments where organic produce commands a higher price than many individuals' vehicle payments. The Whole Foods on North Highland Avenue caters to a varied yet predominantly prosperous clientele. Individuals who procure specialty cheeses and imported vintages, who possess the financial capacity for the premium pricing of sustainably and locally sourced commodities. It was 2:45 on a Saturday afternoon in June. The parking area was active, though not overcrowded. The post-lunch shopping demographic intermingled with those undertaking weekend errands. The ambient temperature hovered around 88 degrees Fahrenheit, characteristic of Atlanta's summer climate, which rendered the interior climate control within establishments akin to a sanctuary and transformed the task of loading groceries into warm vehicles into an exertion requiring speed. James Mitchell had served as a federal prosecutor with the Northern District of Georgia for 15 years. 15 years managing cases encompassing white-collar fraud, civil rights infringements, and public corruption. He had prosecuted gang members and corporate executives with equivalent efficacy. He had presented arguments before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. He had mentored junior prosecutors. His conviction rate was among the highest within the office. His colleagues characterized him as meticulous. His supervisors deemed him relentless. Defense counsel referred to him as formidable. James had completed his undergraduate studies at Howard University, followed by Emory Law School, where he had been an editor of the Law Review. He had interned for a federal judge, briefly worked at a private firm, and subsequently joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, where he discovered his vocational calling. He held a belief in the system. He believed in equitable justice. He was convinced that law enforcement, when administered correctly, safeguarded communities and upheld fundamental rights. However, he was also cognizant, through both professional experience and personal observation, that law enforcement was frequently administered improperly. He had prosecuted officers for civil rights violations. He had reviewed instances where police departments had fabricated probable justification. He had witnessed body camera footage of stops that should never have transpired. He understood the statutes. He was aware of his entitlements, and he recognized that being a federal prosecutor did not render him exempt from discriminatory profiling. That Saturday afternoon, James had driven to Whole Foods to conduct his customary weekly grocery procurement. Nothing out of the ordinary, Nothing remarkable, merely the standard weekend obligation of stocking his refrigeration unit. He had parked his BMW in a space proximate to the entrance, procured a shopping cart, and spent 40 minutes within selecting produce, meats, pantry staples, the typical provisions a single professional requires for the ensuing week. He had made his payment, consolidated the bags into his cart, and wheeled the entire ensemble to his vehicle. He actuated the trunk mechanism, commenced transferring the reusable sacks from the cart to the cargo area, arranging them to prevent displacement during the journey homeward. His vehicle was a 3-year-old BMW 5 Series. A fine automobile, but not ostentatious. Impeccably maintained, registered in his name, insured, entirely lawful, he was executing precisely what countless individuals undertake in grocery store parking lots daily, stowing provisions into a vehicle. Nothing suspicious, nothing unusual, nothing that should warrant scrutiny. However, Officer Nathan Cross, possessing 18 years of service with the Atlanta PD and 22 documented complaints detailing his pattern of profiling, perceived something different. Cross had been affiliated with the Atlanta PD since his early 20s. He had held various assignments over the years, but had dedicated the preceding 12 years to patrol duties in affluent districts, including Buckhead, Virginia Highland, and Morningside, areas characterized by elevated property values and residents who anticipated a visible police presence. His supervisors retained him in these assignments despite his history of complaints, citing, in their own words, his effectiveness in maintaining low crime statistics. What they intended was that Cross apprehended numerous individuals, interrogated numerous individuals, processed numerous identification checks, and thus fostered the illusion of active policing irrespective of whether actual criminal activity was being forestalled. 22 complaints within 18 years, 19 of which involved black professionals in upscale environs. The pattern was incontrovertible. A gentleman attired in a suit exiting a law office encountered Cross, who demanded identification, suggesting the individual did not appear to belong in that particular building. The gentleman was a senior partner at the firm. A complaint was lodged. The resolution included mandatory diversity training. A woman engaged in shopping at Lenox Square. Cross followed her through 3 retail outlets before intercepting her in the parking vicinity, demanding to inspect her possessions. She was a professor from Spelman College, possessing receipts for all her acquisitions. A complaint was filed. The resolution involved an implicit bias workshop, a man jogging in Piedmont Park. Cross detained him, processed his identification, and inquired about his presence in that neighborhood. The man resided 2 blocks distant in a residence he had owned for a decade. A complaint was filed. The resolution was dismissal with a community relations seminar. Every complaint recounted a parallel narrative. Cross perceived black individuals in affluent contexts and was incapable of acknowledging their legitimacy. He presumed illicit activity, trespassing, suspicion. He demanded validation of their right to be present, and when complaints were submitted, the department responded with certificates of training in lieu of disciplinary action. The Internal Affairs Division maintained a dossier on Cross that should have resulted in his dismissal years prior. However, Cross possessed confederates within the department, supervisors who valued his apprehension figures, union representatives who shielded him, and a system that prioritized officer retention over accountability. That afternoon, Cross was conducting patrol in Virginia Highland when dispatch relayed a report concerning a suspicious individual in the Whole Foods parking lot. The caller had reported observing someone who appeared to be examining vehicle door handles. A black male, approximately mid-50s, driving a high-end vehicle. The caller expressed uncertainty as to whether any criminal activity was in progress, but desired police to investigate. Cross responded with alacrity. This was his forte: proactive intervention, preempting criminal acts before their commission. He maneuvered into the Whole Foods parking lot and scanned the area for the described individual. Black male, upscale, vehicle. And there, adjacent to the entrance, a black man was placing items into the trunk of a BMW. Cross's cognition executed the calculation it invariably performed. Expensive automobile, black driver, it must be stolen. There must be an issue. It cannot be legitimate. He did not contemplate the possibility that the individual might own the vehicle. He did not observe the Whole Foods bags, which clearly indicated recent shopping activity. He did not note the composed, unhurried demeanor of someone engaged in a routine task. He perceived what his prejudices had conditioned him to see: a black man who did not belong with that automobile in that particular neighborhood. Cross positioned his patrol vehicle directly behind the BMW, effectively blocking its egress. Do you believe prosecutors and other legal professionals are subjected to profiling as frequently as everyone else? Share your perspective below. James observed the patrol car in his rearview mirror before he heard the utterance. He was in the process of placing the final bag into his trunk when he witnessed the activation of the emergency lights. A sensation of unease pervaded him. He had prosecuted sufficient cases to comprehend precisely what was transpiring. He was being profiled in a Whole Foods parking area. "Sir, kindly step away from that motor vehicle." James straightened his posture and turned around deliberately, his hands clearly visible. "This is my vehicle. I'm simply retrieving my purchased goods." Cross disembarked from his patrol car, his hand resting upon his service sidearm. "I received a report concerning an individual attempting to break into automobiles in this vicinity. You match the description." James felt a surge of indignation, but maintained a measured tone. "Attempting to break into automobiles?" "Officer, I've just exited the establishment. I have groceries. My receipt is readily available." He gestured toward a bag where the receipt was visible, stapled to the uppermost section. "Anyone can obtain a receipt." "Whose vehicle is this?" "It is mine. I own it." "The registration documents are located within the glove compartment." Cross advanced closer. "Keep your hands where I can observe them. Refrain from reaching for anything." James spread his hands slightly. The sheer absurdity of the circumstance began to register. "How am I expected to present identification if I am prohibited from reaching for it? You are being uncooperative. I require backup at this location." James's professional acumen became operative. He understood the implications of the situation. He was cognizant of his rights and recognized that this detention was unlawful. "Difficult, officer. I am a federal prosecutor. I am employed by the U.S. Attorney's Office. I am stowing groceries into my personal vehicle. There is no criminal activity occurring here, no probable justification, no reasonable suspicion. Your current actions constitute an unlawful detention." Cross's expression remained unchanged. If anything, it intensified. In his experience, individuals who claimed positions of prominence were frequently fabricating, attempting to extricate themselves from trouble. Federal prosecutor. "Indeed, I have encountered such claims before. I am being truthful. My designation is James Mitchell. I am an assistant United States attorney. I have been prosecuting federal cases for 15 years, including matters involving civil rights violations. And what you are currently doing is a textbook infringement of the Fourth Amendment. If you are indeed a federal prosecutor, demonstrate it. My credentials are within my vehicle in the central console. However, given your directive to refrain from reaching for anything, I am uncertain how you anticipate me accessing them. This is the juncture where experience becomes a liability." Nathan Cross had been evading repercussions for this conduct for 18 years. 22 complaints had yielded 0 substantive consequences. He had been indoctrinated by a system that affirmed his instincts as accurate, his detentions as justified, and the complainants as individuals merely attempting to circumvent accountability. Consequently, when James Mitchell informed him that he was a federal prosecutor, Cross's cognitive processing interpreted it in the same manner it had processed every other explanation he had heard over 18 years: a fabrication, an evasion, a diversion. Slowly retrieve your credentials. Any abrupt movements will escalate this situation. James inhaled deeply. This was transpiring in a grocery store parking lot in broad daylight. He was being treated as a perpetrator of a crime for the act of stowing his own groceries into his own vehicle. "Officer, I'm about to reach into my vehicle. My movements will be slow and deliberate. I'm retrieving my federal credentials from the central console." He turned gradually, opened the driver's side portal, reached into the console, and extracted his leather credential holder. He turned back toward Cross and extended it, opened, displaying his official badge and photographic identification, unequivocally identifying him as an assistant United States attorney. Cross glanced at it. It could be counterfeit. James stared at him in utter disbelief. Counterfeit federal credentials. Officer, what is your designation? Officer Cross. Officer Cross. These are official credentials issued by the Department of Justice. They bear security features, holograms, my photograph, and my badge number. They are not counterfeit. And the fact that you are suggesting they are indicates to me that you have already concluded that I am being untruthful. Regardless of the evidence I present, I am merely being thorough. No, you are engaging in profiling. You observed a black individual with an expensive automobile and concluded that something must be amiss. You failed to notice the Whole Foods bags. You did not consider that I might have just concluded my shopping. You presumed criminal intent because you are incapable of envisioning a black individual legitimately owning a BMW. I responded to a call concerning what? An individual attempting to break into vehicles. I am stowing groceries. My vehicle is registered in my name. I possess a receipt for the items I purchased. I have federal credentials identifying me as a prosecutor. Precisely what action do you believe I am undertaking incorrectly? Cross reached for his radio. Dispatch. I require a supervisor and an additional unit at Whole Foods on North Highland Avenue. I have a subject who is refusing to cooperate. James retrieved his own mobile device, and I am contacting my office because your actions constitute unlawful detention, and as a federal prosecutor, I possess sufficient familiarity with civil rights legislation to recognize when my own are being violated. Within moments, another patrol vehicle arrived, swiftly followed by a supervisor's automobile. Sergeant Denise Harmon emerged, a veteran of 26 years who had previously collaborated with Cross and harbored no illusions regarding his methodologies. She had perused his complaint file, she had recommended disciplinary action on multiple occasions, and had been overruled by supervisors who prioritized his apprehension statistics. She approached and immediately recognized the predicament. A gentleman standing beside a BMW laden with grocery sacks, federal credentials displayed on the hood of the vehicle where Cross had compelled him to place them. No indications of criminal behavior, merely another of Nathan Cross's signature interventions. Cross. What is transpiring here? Potential vehicle tampering. The subject's account lacks coherence. Harmon retrieved the credentials and examined them with meticulous care. Official credentials from the Department of Justice, holographic seal, security features, a photograph matching the gentleman standing before her. These are genuine federal prosecutor credentials. He could have pilfered them. Cross. These are not items one pilfers. These are issued to assistant United States attorneys. She turned toward James. Sir, I am Sergeant Harmon. I offer my apologies for this unfortunate situation. Would you be so kind as to explain the sequence of events? James's voice was steady, but conveyed undeniable exasperation. Sergeant, I am James Mitchell, Assistant United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. I've been associated with the U.S. Attorney's Office for 15 years. I came here to procure groceries. I parked my vehicle, conducted my shopping, paid for my provisions, and was in the process of loading them into my trunk when Officer Cross arrived behind me, blocked my vehicle, and accused me of attempting to break into automobiles. I presented him with my receipt. I informed him that this was my vehicle. I displayed my federal credentials. He dismissed them all as fabricated or suspicious. He treated me as if I were a criminal for the act of placing groceries into my own vehicle. Harmon surveyed the Whole Foods bags situated in the trunk, examined the receipt, and scrutinized the credentials. She then ran the BMW's license plates through her mobile terminal. The vehicle was registered to James Mitchell at an address in Virginia Highland. All checks confirmed legitimacy. Everything was in order. She turned to Cross with barely suppressed anger. He is a federal prosecutor. This is his vehicle. These are his groceries. There is no criminal offense here. There never was. The report indicated, I do not concern myself with what the report stated. Your mandate was to investigate, not to make assumptions. You stopped a federal prosecutor for stowing groceries. Do you comprehend the gravity of your actions? A female individual who had been loading her own groceries 3 vehicles away approached. Excuse me, officers. I observed the entirety of this incident. That gentleman was merely placing his groceries away. He was not engaged in any improper conduct. Why was he subjected to a stop? Another observer, an elderly Caucasian gentleman, joined them. I have been observing. He exited the establishment with a cart laden with bags and proceeded to load them into his vehicle. That is all. Why is he being detained? Should officers with over 20 complaints still be permitted to conduct patrols? Please share your thoughts. Harmon transmitted a radio message requesting a captain's presence. Within 10 minutes, Captain Robert Chin arrived, a 30-year veteran who had been advocating for Cross's termination for years and had been impeded by union pressure and administrative politics. He listened to Harmon's summary, personally examined James's credentials, conferred with the witnesses, and reviewed Cross's mobile terminal to ascertain that the vehicle registration matched James's identity. He then addressed Cross with an expression of finality, gesturing toward his badge and service weapon. Your service is concluded. Cross's complexion turned ashen. Captain, I was responding to a report. You detained a federal prosecutor for stowing groceries into his registered vehicle. You accused him of vehicle tampering with absolutely no substantiating evidence. You characterized his federal credentials as counterfeit. You have been perpetrating this for 18 years, and it concludes today. Surrender your badge and weapon immediately. Cross handed them over. His hands were trembling. Chin turned to James. Mr. Mitchell, on behalf of the Atlanta PD, I extend my sincerest apologies. This was entirely inappropriate. Officer Cross will be placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, but between ourselves, his career is irrevocably over. Should you opt to submit a formal complaint or pursue legal recourse, the department will cooperate fully. James looked at Cross, then at Chin. Captain, this is not my initial experience with profiling. It is not even my first instance this year, but it is the first occasion a police officer has engaged in such conduct while I was engaged in an activity as routine as grocery shopping in my own neighborhood. I prosecute federal cases. I have incarcerated individuals for civil rights violations, and Officer Cross has just committed one directly in the presence of witnesses and surveillance cameras. He gestured toward the parking lot security cameras. Therefore, yes, I will be submitting a formal complaint. And yes, I will be pursuing legal action because if this can occur to me, a federal prosecutor who is intimately familiar with the law, imagine the implications for individuals who lack my resources or knowledge. By that evening, the narrative had disseminated throughout Atlanta's legal circles and had surfaced in local news reports. Federal prosecutor detained during grocery shopping excursion. Atlanta officer detains a U.S. attorney for stowing food into his own automobile. Witnesses report unlawful stop of federal prosecutor in Whole Foods parking lot. The legal community responded with immediate effect. The U.S. Attorney's Office issued a formal statement endorsing James. The Georgia Association of Black Lawyers unequivocally condemned the incident. Defense attorneys who had previously confronted James in legal proceedings publicly expressed their support for him. Even judges before whom he had appeared conveyed their concerns. James retained the services of a civil rights attorney, although he scarcely required one given his own extensive expertise. The lawsuit was formally initiated 6 weeks later, naming Officer Nathan Cross, his supervisory personnel, who had disregarded 22 complaints over an 18-year span, and the Atlanta PD. The allegations presented were comprehensive and damning. Racial profiling and discrimination, unlawful detention, lacking reasonable suspicion or probable justification, baseless accusation, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deliberate indifference demonstrated by the department towards Cross's persistent pattern of discriminatory stops. The legal filing incorporated Cross's entire disciplinary history, 22 complaints over 18 years, 19 instances involving black professionals in affluent locales, all meticulously documented, all dismissed with mandatory training that demonstrably failed to alter his behavior. Atlanta city attorneys thoroughly reviewed the case. The parking lot security footage provided irrefutable visual evidence of the entire sequence of events. James was calmly loading groceries into his vehicle when Officer Nathan Cross, initiated a confrontation, demanding to see credentials and questioning witnesses. Numerous individuals corroborated James's account of the incident. James presented his credentials and vehicle registration, which unequivocally confirmed his identity and ownership. Officer Cross's stop lacked any legal justification. 2 years later, the city reached a settlement totaling $4,200,000 paid to James Mitchell, representing one of the most substantial payouts in Atlanta's history for an unjustified vehicle stop. Officer Nathan Cross was dismissed from the force 8 weeks following the incident. The termination notice detailed the reasons comprehensively, stating that Officer Cross had engaged in racial profiling against a federal prosecutor who was conducting lawful activities. He had detained Mr. Mitchell without the necessary reasonable suspicion or probable cause and had disregarded legitimate credentials and documentation presented by Mr. Mitchell. Furthermore, Cross's record indicated a persistent pattern of similar misconduct, documented through 22 separate complaints spanning 18 years. The city acknowledged that his continued employment posed a significant liability and constituted a violation of citizens' civil rights. Consequently, his employment was terminated immediately. Officer Cross's name was subsequently added to the National Decertification Index, marking the end of his 18-year career. The police union attempted to contest the termination. However, the city provided the arbitrator with Officer Cross's complete complaint file, security footage of the incident, and James Mitchell's credentials. Faced with this evidence, the union withdrew its appeal. Officer Cross himself issued no public statement. James testified before the Atlanta City Council, stating, "I am a federal prosecutor. For 15 years, I have dedicated myself to upholding the law and ensuring justice. I am well versed in my rights and the Constitution. I understand what constitutes an unlawful stop because it is within my purview to prosecute such actions. Officer Cross stopped me simply for placing groceries into my car. 22 complaints over 18 years, 19 of which involve black professionals. This is not mere misfortune. These are not isolated errors. This constitutes a deliberate pattern. A pattern that your department tacitly permitted for nearly 2 decades because Officer Cross's supervisors prioritized his arrest statistics over the fundamental rights of the individuals he targeted." He paused. $4,200,000 is the price paid to finally remove an officer who should have been dismissed a decade ago. However, financial compensation cannot erase the profound humiliation of being treated as a criminal in a parking lot. It does not alleviate the burning anger of presenting my federal credentials only to have them dismissed as fraudulent. And it certainly does not prevent another officer with 22 complaints from perpetuating the same injustice against another unsuspecting victim. 14 months after this event, the Atlanta Police Department implemented reforms. These included an automatic investigation triggered by 10 complaints exhibiting similar patterns of conduct. Mandatory supervisor review for all traffic stops conducted in affluent neighborhoods was instituted. All interactions in parking lot settings now require body camera activation. Annual training on civil rights, conducted by qualified legal professionals, became mandatory. Furthermore, command staff are now held accountable for officers demonstrating documented patterns of misconduct. The question arises, why do law enforcement agencies delay action until the 22nd complaint is filed instead of intervening after the 3rd? Please share your thoughts in the comments. This incident was not merely about a single Saturday afternoon. It was symptomatic of a department that tolerated Nathan Cross's behavior for 18 years, despite 22 documented complaints clearly indicating racial bias. The pattern was evident from the 5th complaint and undeniable by the 10th. Yet, the Atlanta Police Department continued to assign Cross to patrol duties, deploy him in affluent areas, and disregard the warning signs until he finally targeted an individual possessing the knowledge and resources to demand accountability. James Mitchell paid a steep price, detained in a parking lot, treated as a suspect for engaging in the mundane act of grocery shopping, and forced to witness his legitimate credentials dismissed as counterfeit. Nathan Cross's career has concluded, which represents consequence. The city's payment of $4,200,000 signifies accountability. However, these measures were enacted after 18 years and 22 complaints. 18 years of victims who did not possess federal badges, 18 years of individuals who were subjected to profiling and found without recourse. The critical question remains, what changes will occur now? Will law enforcement departments initiate action upon the 5th complaint rather than waiting for the 22nd? Will they recognize patterns after 3 analogous incidents instead of disregarding them after 19? Will they prioritize the protection of citizens over the shielding of officers with documented biases? Because if we fail to rectify the system that allowed Nathan Cross to remain on patrol for 18 years, if we do not address the prevailing culture that elevates arrest statistics above civil rights, then we are merely anticipating the arrival of the next officer with 20 complaints, the next victim, the next federal prosecutor who is stopped while purchasing groceries. Comment below if this proposed policy should become law. Any officer with 5 similar complaints within a 5-year period would face immediate termination. This would preclude retraining or second chances, mandating swift removal. And if you believe these narratives hold importance, if you are of the opinion that 18 years of complaints should culminate in accountability before the 19th year, then please subscribe. We are committed to exposing officers whose patterns of misconduct have been overlooked for decades. We advocate for improved standards and champion the rights of all individuals who have experienced profiling, regardless of their profession. This discussion transcends the actions of a single officer or a single prosecutor. It delves into systemic issues that provide protection to officers with 22 complaints, while victims bear the brunt of that protection.